webinar. Okay, so with that being said, let's get started. Today's webinar are the top 5 things you need to know when selecting a DevOps release management solution. And we actually have a great panel here to talk to you about it. All 3 of these gentlemen have appeared on our webinars and podcasts before, and I have relationships with them, and I think this is a really talented all-star panel I think you'll find interesting. First, we're happy to be joined by Michael Azoff. Michael is the principal analyst at Ovum, has recently released a series of matrices, I guess is the plural of matrix, around DevOps, around release management solutions, around APM and lifecycle management. Michael, thanks and welcome for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Okay, there's our sound check. Next up is Anders Wahlgren. Anders, as some of you may know, is the CTO of Electric Cloud, and really one of the more often cited players in the DevOps and release management solution industry. Anders, welcome and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Sound works, great. And then last but certainly not least, but in this case he may or may not be on, we have Sam Fell, who was crazy enough to log in here while he was away on vacation. That's dedication. But unfortunately Sam's bandwidth is somewhat dicey. And if he's here, he's here. Sam?
Yes, I am. Hey, Alan, how are you? Good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. So where Sam was going to be the moderator, I am going to try to, I don't know if those are big shoes to fill, but I will try to step in as much as I can and allow us to get going here. And Sam, if you are connected, well, please feel free to chime in there. That all being said, guys, let's get started. Let's move to our next slide here, and we're going to hand things over.
Great. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.
Good.
So the genesis of the webinar here is, as Alan mentioned, is there was a Ovum decision matrix that was recently published. Michael spearheaded that effort. We participated. A lot of different vendors participated. And it was all about DevOps and DevOps release management. And so I thought a great place to start would be to talk a little bit about the definition of DevOps that the Ovum team uses. And so we can see it right here on the screen. We don't necessarily need to read through it. But at a very high level, it's an IT movement that encourages automation as a way of reducing errors and improving communication and collaboration between all the different stakeholders in a business or an organization. I don't know if, Michael, if you had any other comments that you wanted to make about that quote that came directly from the matrix. And of course, everyone who is joining us on this webinar today is going to get a copy of that after the webinar as well.
Yes, thanks, Anders. So basically we needed a working definition, and this statement about DevOps touches on all the what we believe to be the really crucial aspects of it. It's automation, reducing errors, especially manual errors, reducing manual steps, which can lead to a lot of human errors, and breaking down those silo walls and improving communication, collaboration. So this is really at the root of DevOps, and provides a useful guide to what we mean by DevOps. I'm sure lots of people have their own way of looking at it, but this was suitable at least for the exercise that we took. And of course, automation was the key focus of the report, which looked at continuous delivery and the wider aspects around managing release application delivery. So yeah, thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. And so we're talking about what is DevOps. That's some pretty interesting statistics that I think I'll share from the last survey that they just did. If we could go to the next slide.
Yeah. Sam, I think we're having a little bit of audio issues. so I'm not sure if you're hearing us, but Jules, can you move to the next slide, please? Okay. Sam?
Yeah, we may have lost Sam.
So let's jump in. So Anders, why
Yeah.
DevOps?
Well, you know, I think the current slide I think is really interesting, and I know Michael has this in his presentation as well. This graph is taken from the Puppet Labs and IT Revolution's State of DevOps report from 2015. And I mean, the really interesting thing about this, these curves is that the difference between a high-performing software organization and a low-performing software organization isn't measured in percentages. It's measured in X. You're 30x faster at deployments or deployment frequency. You're 200x faster at lead times in getting things out, and so on and so forth. So there's a real qualitative and quantitative difference between high-performing DevOps organizations and low-performing software organizations, and it is one of those things where this is starting to become a pretty critical competitive advantage for those organizations that do it well.
Sure. And Anders, if you don't mind me jumping in real quickly, just coincidentally, the 2016 Puppet Lab report came out, I think, yesterday, if not today. I was briefed on it last week, and I think the gap and the gulf has grown even wider, and it's even more apparent now what why DevOps and the high-performing IT organizations that, having clear advantages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Michael, any thoughts here before we move to the next slide?
Yes, absolutely. So I heard Gene Kim, who participated in producing this report. He was speaking about it at a DevOps Days meeting in London, and one of the things that he points out, and this is really interesting, that the high-performing organizations, high-performing in their DevOps maturity, correlates with success in the market, in the business world, in terms of market capitulation, revenue, and so on. So, I mean, it was a subset of the survey returns that included information as to their companies, so that Gene and others who are looking at the survey were able to actually track those companies in the market, and so I think that correlation just reinforces the fact that DevOps isn't just an IT activity. It's about delivering value for the business. This is really why businesses today are so interested in DevOps. It's become a very, very hot topic. It's a huge one now for us as analysts. We get a lot of queries from our customers asking us about DevOps. The bleeding edge, born on the cloud companies have been doing it for many years now, but a lot of the rest of the world that's a little bit slower in adopting these new approaches, they now very much have got DevOps on their agenda at a senior C-suite level, asking, well, how can we transform our organizations to be DevOps? So I think this, coming back to this chart, it does reinforce that if you do your DevOps well within your IT, then it's good for the business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move on to our next. Is Sam back on? No? Okay. So when we look at the DevOps landscape, Anders, you want to explain this slide perhaps to us? Or
well, I think this might actually be Michael's slide, so I'll let him take it.
Michael?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah. So we basically segmented the market in terms of the different tools, how they fit together, and this is and the result was this graphic, and hopefully it's useful to understand how the different tools play in that. And it has to be said, there's a lot of open source tools that are used within this ecosystem, and which Electric Cloud and all the other vendors, the premium product vendors, will integrate with those open source tools, because many of them are used, especially, for example, around build tools, test tools, provisioning tools, performance testing. So there's a very big ecosystem there. So in terms of what we actually looked at in terms of the enterprise solutions for managing DevOps release automation, the bits that we looked at are involved in this graphic. So release management orchestration, continuous delivery, release automation, and integration. So those were the key functions that we were looking for and which we evaluated the different products in the market. But it does show you that it is quite a wide-ranging market with a lot of different tools that play in there. And then ultimately, release management is part of the ALM, so we see integration with the ALM solution as being quite important. And then on the other side, there is that question of how DevOps fits in with ITIL, and that is a recurring question for those organizations, especially the large organizations with mature ITIL processes in place. It's the sort of questions that they ask us, how DevOps fits in with that. So that could be something we delve into later, but it's certainly a question that does come up a lot.
Yes, it has. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Anders, unless you have any comments on that one?
No, I think it's Michael all the way.
Okay, Michael, it's all you.
Right, so culture, yeah. So it's basically, in order to be successful with DevOps, simply implementing continuous delivery and changing a few job titles, that's not going to make you a DevOps organization. And the reason why culture is important is because you need to carry with you the people, and that means just bringing them along the journey and taking DevOps step by step so that they're able to make DevOps succeed. I mean, as we said earlier, we want to drop those silo walls, and that is very much a cultural shift, and not an easy one. So this is why we think it's very important. In fact, we see the successful DevOps implementations are the ones where the CEO, the CDO, the CIO are all behind the transformation and are able to support DevOps transformation within the organization. So, yeah. So, I don't know, Anders, do you want to chip in, or shall I just carry on?
Go ahead, Michael. If Anders wants to say something, well.
All right. So, enabling rapid change. So, this is really the key driver. It's not a continuous deployment, which is all about instantly putting change into production, but about continuous delivery. It's when the business wants to change as quickly as possible, it's being able to do that. And if it's painful, if it takes you 6 weeks to get a change into production, that is painful, especially for businesses now. They want to respond to market opportunities, and they want to be able to fix things quickly. So this is really about being able to make those changes rapidly. And one of those aspects is around, well, we've put in CD, but what if we've got applications that are actually quite slow to change in production? And this is driving microservices. So again, something we can delve into a little bit later. Then there's the question of continuous integration. DevOps talks all about continuous delivery, but what about your continuous integration? How effective is that? Are you using different tools to do CI within your organization? Are you backing up? Are you able to make instant changes to your code and have them automatically run through regression testing suite? So continuous integration, continuous testing, you need to have that functioning really well before you can move on to the next step, which is continuous delivery. So a lot of organizations are actually still in a sort of struggle phase around CI and CD. So they really need to get that right before they do CD. And then orchestrating end-to-end. So this is where we see the benefit of a mature enterprise solution that is able to scale for the needs of large organizations, and they're able to orchestrate that end-to-end pipeline, being able to do reuse. Again, we can delve into that in deeper when we go into the top 5, but those are the sort of things that really, for a large organization, takes the burden away, it reduces the errors, because we have ease of use and automation working very well indeed. So that's what we're looking for with a tool that does good orchestration. Okay, that's me done.
Oh, yeah, if we can move to the next one. So Michael, again, talking about DevOps mandates, the architecture operate at scale.
Sure. So yeah, I touched on this just on a previous slide, but operating at scale is really a crucial aspect of what we're looking for in an enterprise solution. If you're just a 5-man team on a startup, then really you probably do well with just some of the open source tools. You can manage that fine. But if you're a large enterprise and you have thousands of microservices that you need to run in your continuous delivery pipelines, well, being able to meet that sort of challenge, this is really where the top solutions on the market are able to manage, and it's being able to scale up and down with ease as the need arises, being able to scale not just across the number of streams, the number of pipelines that you're running into production, but also being able to support the scale of your project in terms of the number of developers that you're supporting. We want to see that as we add developers into a project, that the productivity goes up. That's going back to Fred Brooks and his Mythical Man Month, all about how we architect solutions to be loosely coupled and to reduce dependencies. And DevOps plays very nicely with microservices in enabling that, so that when you increase the size of your project, you can increase your productivity. So that's a very interesting development in how DevOps is driving microservices and how that is helping that scaling aspect.
Yes. All right, let's move to our next one. So Michael, why an ODM on DevOps release management?
Yeah, well, it's our first one. I wrote a report back in 2011, and we saw a lot of newcomers on the scene, and we wrote about it 2010, 2011, and soon after, some of the big vendors were buying them up. Electric Cloud began to move into the DevOps arena. So it's been an evolutionary. We've seen the market evolve, and we thought it was time for Ovum to produce a decision matrix on the top solutions in the market. So it was just very timely. And as this statement says, we believe that it is a must-have in the market today, and this is why, in fact, we're seeing so many of our clients now asking us about DevOps, because they realize it's no longer a differentiator, it's a must-have to compete in the market. We have seen companies appear from nowhere and take significant market share, driven by DevOps, driven by Agile, driven by DevOps, and driven by microservices. And they're able to evolve their products rapidly in the market, get customer feedback, make adjustments, get better at the products they produce and the services they produce. So the market is transforming. There's also the digital economy, a much wider aspect of how the world is changing and being more reliant on the internet, on e-commerce, and with Internet of Things coming along. The world is changing around us, and without a good software delivery capability, I think it's going to be an impediment not to have that in your business. So that's why we believe it is a must-have today.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So before we jump in, I wanted to do our polling questions right about here. And I happen to like polling questions in webinars. It gives the audience a chance to interact, and it gives us a good chance to understand where you guys are. So first question is, can you safely release software as fast as the business demands? It's really just a yes or no answer at this point. Shouldn't take us too long to answer. We'll close voting off here in just another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And no. Can you safely release software? Well, Michael, Anders, is that typical of what you expected? 2/3 no?
That's been a fairly, I mean, I know this is not a scientific survey by any means, but it's a fairly consistent number. That it's way less than half. Sometimes much less than half that feel that they're sort of prepared and ready and able to release software as fast as they need. It's a it's a difficult thing to do, and we're still in the process of figuring out how to do it better. DevOps helps, and I think that's the way the industry is going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to chime in, I see that as well. That it is. A lot of organizations out there are still transitioning and implementing their CD and trying to get it right. So that reflects what we're seeing.
Okay, I think we have another polling question here. When do you plan to implement DevOps? And if you're already implementing DevOps, let's say it's 0 to 6 months, so that we know you're in that camp and not in the never or the 1 year plus. But if you guys can answer, we'll close voting down in just a couple seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2. Come on, folks, give us a vote. 3, 2, 1.
And while we're voting, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, Sam, you're back.
Hey, all right, I found a phone that worked. Sorry about that, guys. You guys were handling it great without me, though. I could just sit back and relax in Mexico.
Yeah, well, you should have done that to begin with. It was vacation. Anyway, that's what I call it, vacation. But let's get to the answers here. When do you plan to implement DevOps? And clearly, either already doing it, let's say, or 0 to 6 months is the overwhelming choice of the people. But what I find really interesting, and Michael and Sam and Anders, I'd like to hear from you. 3%, only 3% said never.
Yeah, I'm just going to assume that they accidentally clicked on never.
Okay, so those 3 are just accident hanging chads, as we say in Florida.
These numbers line up very well with other. We do this polling question pretty much all the time, and 83% on the last webinar we did said between 0 and 12 months, and right here we're at 87. So it looks as though people are pushing themselves out of the 13+ months and into the 0 to 6 or 7 to 12. So that is a trend. I don't know, Michael, if you're seeing the same thing with your clients.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our parent company Informa has just run a big DevOps event, and it's huge. It's hugely of interest, and the sort of issues are one around pain and how to get it right. So they're in the middle of it. They're in the midst of doing these implementations. So yeah, very much so.
Great. And then I think we have one more polling question, correct? When do you plan to implement ARA? Right?
Application release automation for those
I was just going to
Perfect.
do it. Yes. When do you plan to release ARA? And again, we'll just give you, it shouldn't be too hard to figure your answer out to this. We'll close voting off in another few seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And survey says, Sam, Michael, Anders, what do you would know better than I if this was what is this indicative of?
I mean, the numbers are pretty spectacularly consistent with the other questions. So that sort of leads a little bit to think of what is the relationship between ARA and DevOps, because obviously there's a lot of overlap and interest in pursuing these things.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, certainly as a first step for DevOps, you need to get your CI and your CD in place, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, the ARA or CD or advanced release management solution would certainly be a necessary step to complete the process.
Yeah. Yeah, ARA is sort of what takes you from dev to DevOps, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, very good. So in the OVM decision matrix that you guys published, you did have a bunch of requirements for what to look for in a solution when you're trying to get to DevOps release management. So we're going to talk a little bit about those now. Before we go into them, if you could go to the next slide, Jules, we'll look at what those criteria were. And I don't know, Michael, if you want to talk a little bit about how you came up with these criteria. We don't have to go through all of them, but any thoughts that you had on how you graded folks?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So the decision matrix was three-dimensional. The technology dimension is reflected in this chart here, the rainbow chart, as I call it. The way you read it is that the highest score is on the blue end of the spectrum, the violet end on the spectrum, and then the lower score is red. So there's no red on this one, but that's the how you read this chart. And we had 170 odd questions that we sent out to every vendor in the evaluation, and those questions were divided across these different categories. So the scores we're looking at here are aggregate scores for those categories, from general features, application manifest, through to the pipeline design execution and so on, and down to the integrations. So it's essentially very much looking at those features of the solutions and how they fared against each other. And as you can see, ElectraCloud, happily for ElectraCloud, you came out very well and appeared in our leaders category.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And so if we go on to the next slide, one of the things that is increasingly becoming important as we start talking about these pipelines and delivering valuable applications to end users, a lot of folks are talking quite a bit about microservices. So Michael, do you want to take a minute and talk at a high level about how microservices fit in to a healthy pipeline? Anders, I know you and I have done some of these talks on C9D9 and other about these, but Michael, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm not going to delve into this chart, but it's here as a sort of reminder of what a microservice, how ideally we deploy it in containers, and Docker, of course, is very popular for that. And ideally, you want to put one microservice in one container. It's an architecture that is very suitable for a DevOps organization, because you can make changes in place, live. The microservices are designed to be resilient, so when another microservice they're consuming or communicating with, it goes down, they're able to wait until it comes back up again. And so you are able to make changes in production very rapidly indeed. And in fact, this whole aspect of an architecture that is highly resilient has led to a change in culture, if you like, in testing, because certainly I've been seeing in conferences testers going around with T-shirts saying, I test in production, which you know, some years ago that would have been a definite no-no. But you can only really do that sort of testing in production with a Simian Army and Chaos Monkey and all of those strange beasts of testing agents that go around knocking things out, and just to see how resilient the system is. The Amazons, the Twitters and Netflixes and so on, Facebooks, they use this type of approach, and they can only do it because they're using a microservices architecture. So it is a complete different world that we're now in with DevOps and microservices, and a lot of organizations want to get there as well. But it is very nuanced. It's not always the right thing for every type of application, and we do have a lot of advice to give organizations as to what is the best approach for any given project. But certainly Microservices is at the bleeding edge and a very nice fit with DevOps.
Right, and one of the things that I think folks like about the microservices model is, and you have it here, is that Docker, sort of that container, the containerization. And the containerization, one of the things that we talk about with our client base and our prospects all the time is figuring out how to get fidelity across multiple facets of your software development lifecycle. So you want fidelity of your environment, right, which a container provides that for you. You want fidelity of that artifact. You want to make sure that you've got the correct artifact. One of the things that Gene Kim says is one of the highest predictors of success for ops teams is having a versioned artifact repository when they're deploying things into production. Instead of deploying something that looks like it might be the right version number, you are deploying the absolutely correct version number, and that makes a big difference. And then the third thing is really the process, getting fidelity of that process as you're moving things throughout the ecosystem. And the sort of microservice of the containerization of applications helps you with a few of those things, but it doesn't necessarily help you with all of them. If we could go to the next slide, we can actually start talking about some of those different vertices that you had in your chart, Michael, that help folks get to a stance where they can actually start delivering software with higher fidelity sort of across all of the different groups. We talk about going from dev sort of to DevOps. And the first one that we have here is really to talk about that application manifest. And that application manifest helps you model and version the applications and all of the different artifacts that it comprises, that application, as well as the infrastructure and the middleware. And so I don't know if, Michael, you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the findings that you had there and why you called that out as relatively important as part of the ODM.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is really what we're looking for in an enterprise grade solution, one where ease of use in defining an application deployment blueprint, if you like, in an application manifest, and being able to reuse it and version it and have variations, and just the ease of use in managing a complex environment which you will get in a large enterprise, and also helping in the paradigm of immutable servers, for example, where you never make a change in production. You always make a release. You always make it in one place, and then you always know that everything in production is what you have back in your in development. So it feeds into that as well. So a lot of advantages in having a good management solution for your releases.
Excellent. And so Anders, one of the things that Electric Flow allows you to do that a lot of other solutions don't necessarily is to create that very rich, robust application manifest. What does that really give people over and above, say, writing everything with shell scripts or hard coding everything for individual environments?
Well, there's a number of things that help with that. I mean, I think first and foremost, if you're going to do any sort of DevOps automation around application deployment or application release, you need to know the structure, the architecture, the components, the artifacts that are involved and make up that application. All of the services, all of the back-end stuff, all of the front-end stuff, everything. And by modeling that, either visually, as we kind of see on the slide here, or using our domain-specific language, so you can do model as code, as you can do for all of these things, is really kind of at the core of how you then go off and describe how you do a deployment for these things, how you do a rollback, all of those kinds of things. And it also is there's also an aspect of scalability to this, which is you've got dozens, hundreds, thousands of applications, and they almost certainly are sharing components between them. And so you need to manage those relationships and those dependencies and make sure that you're using the right best practices in all the right places for deploying those components. And so kind of giving you one place where you can go in and define these things and then work on them.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to the next slide where we talk about the second thing you need to look for. We talked about this a little bit earlier, sort of that fidelity of the process. You guys called it, Michael, you called it workflow and process design. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that's important when you're looking for a DevOps release management solution?
Yeah, so this is really at the heart of the continuous delivery, is being able to define the pipelines and being able to manage them, and especially if you've got microservices applications, then you're going to have a lot of these pipelines, and just being able to manage that scale of complexity is essential. So we divided the look at these pipelines in terms of how easy and how feature-rich was it to design them, and then I think the next one we'll be looking at execution. But yeah, this was really at the core of what we're looking for in a DevOps release management solution.
Absolutely. And so, Anders, when you go out and you talk with folks that are implementing electric flow solution, we've had workflow for a long time as part of our earlier product, Electric Commander. And now, on top of that, we've added this pipeline ability. What does this really allow folks to do?
So it's, it really kind of comes down to, there's the what, the how, and the where. And the what, we just covered. That was the application manifest. The how is really, pipeline design or workflow design, which is, what are all the stages that this particular application or component or service goes through in order to, and that could be any sort of pipeline, right? That could be the CI pipeline, or it could be the integration testing pipeline, or system testing, or security, or all the stages that go into how you carry the software from essentially when it's checked in by the engineer to when it's live and usable by the customer. And understanding what your end-to-end pipeline looks like is very important. Even if you don't automate 100% of it, although you should, but even if you don't, you need to have not just conceptually, but almost physically, if it's on a whiteboard or what have you, the end-to-end process that your software goes through. If you don't have an understanding of that, then I would sort of argue that you don't really have an understanding of how you ship your software. And most of us, I think when we get in a room, we start to understand all kinds of things that we didn't know before about what our process actually is. And so it's often very, very important to get all the right people in the room and sort of nail down what the process really looks like. And that's, that's essentially what pipeline design, is for.
Perfect. That's great. And Michael, let's go to the next slide, Jules. Michael, you talked about this earlier, and as soon as you've designed that pipeline, at that point, you want to execute it, and you want to make sure that you're executing it if you need to at scale, and you're providing visibility for people to do that predictably and efficiently. What was your sort of the impetus behind putting that in the ODM, and tell us your thoughts about why it's important.
Yes, so this ties in closely with the design, but this is now looking at the execution. So the sort of things we're looking for is sort of how complex can you actually assign your execution in terms of, for example, having programmatic loops. How easy was it to implement a rollback? The scheduling of executions and doing intelligent deployment. So, for example, if a component is already up to date in production, then you don't want to redeploy that. So just a whole bunch of features around the actual execution was being evaluated in that. Yeah.
And as far as that execution goes, one of the things that's very important in DevOps is feedback, right? And so being able to see the actual execution steps as they're occurring is very important. And then being able to refactor that pipeline based on successes, based on the troubleshooting that you've done, based on any optimizations that you want to do is really very important. You're touching a lot of tools over the course of that pipeline, right? You're orchestrating, as you said earlier, you're sort of orchestrating that end-to-end process. And so that necessitates touching a lot of tools. You might be integrating with Jenkins. You might be using Chef. You might be using Puppet. You might be using, you know, Selenium, Sonatype, Nexus, tons of different tools. And you want to make sure that you're getting the best response time out of them. You're operating them the most efficiently. As you execute them, being able to see that live as it happens, collect information about that execution, and use that to help, again, refactor that pipeline moving forward, helps to make that that cycle time and that whole cycle, I guess, more efficient. I don't know, Anders, did you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, once you get out of the kind of garage phase of your startup or of your DevOps journey, and you need to start deploying this across lots and lots of different teams, lots of applications, lots of services, then the execution phase of this can become a bottleneck. And having something that gives you a single pane of glass that kind of drives the software, drives the code through the pipeline, end to end, and gives you a single pane of glass where you can do root cause analysis for problems. You have a test failure, you can drill right into it. You have a deployment failure, you can drill right into it. You can collect lots and lots of metadata to use either at runtime or use later for analytics or metrics, those kinds of things. So I think that having a single kind of dashboard that you drive the entire execution of the pipeline from is incredibly valuable.
Perfect, thank you. All right, Jules, if we could go to the next slide, and let's talk about governance and security. Going really fast sometimes scares people. One of the things that we'll be talking about at DevOps Enterprise Summit this year, both in the UK next week, as well as here in San Francisco in November, is being able to make sure that these pipelines that you're building are secure. I know Anders has a couple of great sayings that I'll let him give when it comes to automation and how that helps. But Michael, tell us a little bit about why governance was so important to you to include in the ODM.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really one of the key functions we're looking for, again, for an enterprise-grade solution. If you just implement, if you just tie together your release capability with tools that still require some manual steps, you're not able to scale that. And depending on what sort of vertical you work in, but if regulations apply, how are you going to satisfy the auditors? And this is really where a large-scale organization, especially one that is regulated and has auditors, they're going to like a solution that really clearly demonstrates that the whole process is governed, that nobody can make a change without it being known, that the change itself is known to have gone through all the QA and testing. So those are the sort of things that are really crucial and important for the ops people, because they've handed responsibility to developers to actually press a button and deploy into production, but it's their responsibility, it's the ops responsibility for for ensuring a low-risk environment, and a good solution is able to satisfy their needs for monitoring and ensuring that that the processes are done correctly and can be proven to be done so. So this is really, I would say, an absolutely must-have for an enterprise solution.
Perfect. Anders, any thoughts or comments on governance and security?
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase that I use quite frequently is automation is auditing. When we first started out, thinking and doing DevOps, I think the knee-jerk reaction a lot of us had was, oh, well, geez, this is going to freak out the auditors. We're going to automate everything, and we're going to check in, and then 10 minutes later it goes into production. Well, it turns out it's actually quite the opposite, which is, in order to get good at doing DevOps and continuous delivery and those types of things, you really do need to automate everything. And what does an auditor fundamentally want? They fundamentally want two things. They want you to document your process, and then they want you to demonstrate that you use the documented process. Well, sitting down and automating your software delivery pipeline end to end, and doing that automation, that is essentially documenting your process. And then the execution of that pipeline then gives you the record of what you did. How did we deploy this application? When? Who did it? What was the pipeline that was used? What was the testing stages it went through? What was the reason for this deployment? What was the change record that this was associated with? Who did it? Did we skip any steps? All of those things are now available to be audited, and in a maybe not necessarily in the absolute correct format that the auditors will want it in, but you're not going to have to go digging after this stuff. And so I think overall auditors and governance people in general are pretty high on automation because it actually makes everybody's life easier.
Fantastic. And then number 5, the last thing that you want to make sure that your DevOps release management solution has is it's got to work with all the tools that you already care about, right? You want a solution that fits in with the process that you have. You can't change your process to fit into some tool's preconceived notion of how your enterprise should run. The folks that I talk to, they've got legacy technical debt that they've assumed from a merger and acquisition or just from 30-year-old applications that they're still trying to support. Those pipelines touch lots of different components. They touch lots of different people. Making sure that you can model that and not sort of force yourself to change the way you do business when you're trying to automate it right up front is going to help that adoption curve, I think, quite a bit. Over time, obviously, you can refactor and refine, but being able to work with all the tools that you currently have, whether it's Chef on one side and Puppet on the other, is super important. So, Michael, you talked about this in the ODM. What are your thoughts on integrations and the importance of that as part of a healthy pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So clearly the environment in organizations is one where there's just a mix of different tools are used. Even if an organization takes a standard through mergers and acquisitions, it soon changes. So the real world is that people use a whole bunch of different tools, and especially developers, they have preferences, and we tend to look at the ecosystem of ALM solutions in terms of management at one layer and then the core tools at the other. So if developers have preferences for certain open source core tools, that's fine. Open source is a great community, but you need your management solution to tie in with those, and so integrations are absolutely crucial. And as we referred to earlier, the DevOps space, landscape, tool space in particular is one that has a lot of segments and a lot of different tools, especially open source tools, playing a number of them. So we really want to see an enterprise-grade release management solution that will integrate with a wide range of those tools out there.
Fantastic. Anders, final thoughts on the integrations before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, I think it's really crucial to, especially if you're in sort of a bimodal IT situation, you've got multiple applications, different kinds of pipelines, which honestly I'm not sure that's called bimodal IT because there are obviously more than two. I think it should probably be called multimodal IT.
Right.
You're going to have some applications that are legacy, some that are on mainframes, some that you're maybe not touching except for security things, and then maybe some more greenfield, new things that you're refactoring or redoing as microservices and all of those kinds of things. And so it's, it's incredibly important that your pipeline be able to, not be prescriptive, first of all, right? Not say, here is the way thou shalt, release your software, because, we're all unique snowflakes, and we all have, little wrinkles in how we like to do things, whether they're for good reasons or bad reasons. They are, and you have to take that into account. So I think, not being prescriptive, being very, having a very open system where you can do integrations, and not just integrations with third-party tools, but the likelihood that there's homegrown tooling for these types of things is pretty high, especially in large established organizations. And so it's not just a question of, do you support the latest version of XYZ? It's can you integrate with and can you support our existing systems that we built ourselves? And so lack of prescriptiveness and not mandating things like tool chains and those kinds of things are very, very necessary to be able to play in the sort of bimodal / multimodal IT world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, exactly. And then one last thought on this slide, Jules, before we move on, is we've got this little snippet of code there, and that's basically showing that you also want to make sure that you have a solution that allows you to programmatically, as well as you've seen sort of our user interface over the course of this webinar. Everything that you can do with our user interface is also available. You can affect that the same exact way through code. We have a domain-specific language that's pretty unique in the industry for application release automation, DevOps release automation. As well, it allows you to control our entire product, as well as a command line interface, REST-based APIs, and SDK, so that if a plugin does not exist, and Michael mentioned this earlier, there are a ton of tools already out there. There are also a ton of tools being released all the time. And so you can't depend on what a published plugin library looks like today. You have to be able to take that platform and extend it to be able to plug in with new tools as they come out. And with that, let's switch over to some questions. I'm going to mute myself, and I guess Jules or Alan, take it away.
Yes. Sam, I'm here. Before we get to questions, I do want to apologize. I see the comments in the question section and in chat. I realize we had some audio difficulties first with Sam, and then Anders' audio might have been a little, I don't know what the word is, but not clear. Let's leave it at that. But anyway, these things happen, and again, we apologize. Let me jump into questions. So our first question is, Autodesk is looking at several tools, and we're really trying to understand features, technologies that should be top of mind in selecting a release management tooling platform. We are going to Docker in the future. Just giving some background. They're going to Docker in the future, but today it's manual. So how do we go from where we are today to where we're going tomorrow? What should we be considering? And before I ask for an answer, let me just give a part two of that. Tools they're looking at include Netflix's Spinnaker, Zibia Labs, XL, Electric Cloud's Electric Flow. We're really struggling to understand what's best of breed or bread and the position of each tool. Sam or Anders, this sounds, and Michael too, either any of you can jump in here on that.
It's really one of the most frequent questions, and if my audio is crappy, just cut me off and somebody else can answer. But one of the most frequent questions I get is, where do we start? How do we sort of, take this mountain and chip away at it and make something useful out of it? And I think the most important thing, I think, is to understand, what your end-to-end process is, right? And then pick a tool that's gonna be in support of that. If you're a smaller team and you need, you only have a few applications, then there's tons of good open source stuff out there. Obviously, if you're larger, you have bigger concerns around scalability and security and flexibility and those kinds of things, then commercial tools. And I'm biased, obviously, because that's my business. But commercial tools, offer a lot, and there's a lot to be said, I think, for open source. But there's also a kind of a total cost of ownership thing that you need to keep in mind, which is who's going to do the support, who's going to do the bug fixing and those kinds of things. And open source is wonderful, but it has limitations as well. So I think I would just sort of keep that in mind and test drive. See what works for you, and don't necessarily, going blind. Test drive some of these things and.
Yep. You know what, Andres, your audio is kind of breaking up. I apologize, but I think that answered the question. Okay.
Well, I can just chime in and suggest people also look at the Ovum decision matrix, and there are SWOT analyses for the different products in there, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. So I think that's a good place also to have a look at.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Next question. Can we elaborate on what is an ODM? Sam, you want to grab that one? Or Michael?
I think that would probably be Michael.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a Michael.
Yeah. So Ovum decision matrix. So in the IT analyst, industry analyst world, I'm sure you've heard of Gartner. They have a magic quadrant. So our Ovum decision matrix, ODM, is our equivalent of that kind of evaluation.
Great. This one might be a Michael question, or if someone else wants to chime in. Quote unquote, implementing DevOps is such a broad term. Are people that are implementing CI, for instance, deemed to be implementing DevOps?
Well, it's certainly an essential first step. So you need to get your continuous integration and continuous testing function working well in those projects that you want to move to DevOps. So you need to get that right before you can really do your CD. And as we're seeing, organizations are struggling even with CI and CT. So that would be the first thing to get right before you can really do CD well.
Okay. Very specific electric cloud question because we're running low on time. Do you guys integrate with Atlassian stack? Sam?
Yes, absolutely. We integrate with most tools that are out there that are well known and being used. If we don't have an integration built in, again, we have full SDK and published REST APIs that allow you to either control our platform from them, like Jira, have them trigger something, or to be able to go out and control something else, to go back and close that ticket, for instance.
Great. Guys, we do have a few other questions around electric cloud integrations, ServiceNow, HP, ALM. We'll try to get them in writing because we're already 1 minute over, and you have to be respectful of people's time. We're going to have to call it a day right here. Again, apologies for audio problems, folks. We do the best we can, but it's still the internet. Sam, Michael, Anders, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank all of you for listening in today, and thanks to Electric Cloud for sponsoring this webinar. This is Alan Schimmel, and we hope to see you at another DevOps.com webinar soon. Have a great day, everyone.